Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's Wednesday, December 18th. A bit of a break in the schedule for Indiana basketball. They will host Chattanooga coming up this weekend at Assembly Hall. Obviously, most of the attention in Bloomington from a sports perspective is centered on Friday's college football playoff first round matchup in South Bend. Indiana going to be going north to take on Notre Dame. But on this week's Podcast on the Brink, we're going to talk some Big Ten hoops. Dylan Burkhardt of UMHoops back on the show. We're going to bounce around to some Big Ten teams, and I want to get Dylan's take on some different programs around the league. Try to maybe find out who he thinks is a legitimate contender for the Big Ten, and maybe who some of these teams that are up there towards the top of the standings that could fade later in the season. Before we get to Dylan, wanted to remind you that this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink brought to you by our friends at Visit Bloomington. Visit Bloomington is also a proud partner of Indiana University Athletics. Right now, Visit Bloomington is giving you and one friend the chance to score free Hoosier basketball tickets. Go to visitbloomington.com/contests. That's contest with an S on the end, and enter the IU men's basketball giveaway. The winners will also receive a free gift card to Bucchetto's Pizza and Pasta. The website, once again, visitbloomington.com/contests with an S on the end. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. One of the games in Indiana that you're able to win tickets to coming up is the UCLA game, which, looking at UCLA's performance so far this season, looked like a legitimate contender for the Big Ten title. But Dylan, always good to talk hoops with you. We talk pretty regularly. We hashed out the top 40 players in the Big Ten list before the season. We've probably already got some regrets from that, but how you doing on this Wednesday afternoon?
I'm doing well. It's really the prime slot here before the football playoff to talk a little Big Ten hoops. So I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So obviously wanted to get your quick thoughts on Michigan. They're off to a really solid start. Got a big game tonight. You may be listening to this after Michigan plays tonight, but they're playing in Charlotte against Oklahoma, which Oklahoma, a really good team. I had a chance to watch them quite a bit down at the Battle for Atlantis on TV. Really good freshman guard and Jeremiah Fears. But Michigan been one of the better stories thus far. Early on in the Big Ten season, Dusty May has the Wolverines. I wouldn't say rolling completely, but they've played really well here early in the season. But it's a big game for them tonight. Just big picture thoughts on the start here of the Dusty May era, what's gone right, and maybe what are you looking forward to seeing here in the next couple weeks as we conclude non-conference play and get back into the Big Ten schedule?
Yeah, I think the most encouraging part of, I guess, 10 games, the first 10 games of Dusty May at Michigan has been that I think you can really see a vision, a plan for how he wants to play, how he wants his team to play. And I think there's a lot to be encouraged by just the game by game results matching that. I don't think Michigan's played completely perfect. They played well in Fort Myers. They've played a lot of teams that were supposed to be good this year, but maybe aren't quite as good as they were expected to be. But you can see the pieces fitting together. You can see the plan on offense. You can see the plan on defense. And it's basically that recipe has stuck throughout the year. Like, there's some big problems with this team right now. They turn it over way too often. They haven't been great on the defensive glass. But when you consider just what kind of state the program was in 12 months ago, and then you consider like the fact that most of the roster was brought in basically in a 4 to 5 week period in the transfer portal, it's pretty impressive, I think, how well Michigan's playing. But also, they're 8-2. They're top 25 on KenPom, and you can see like there's a lot of room for this team to improve as the year goes on. And I think that's the thing Michigan fans would probably be most encouraged by right now is this team is clearly, for 4 to 8 minute stretches, they've looked incredible. And if they can get to play those stretches maybe for 32 to 36 minutes a game, they might be in a really good spot moving forward. And then starting 2-0 in the Big Ten, it kind of gives you that wind under your sails of, hey, we won at Wisconsin, we beat Iowa, we have 2 wins in the bag before the Big Ten play starts again. I think that helps solidify things, even if there might not be a signature win or something like that in non-conference play right now.
The ears of Indiana fans might have perked up a little bit when you mentioned Michigan's two biggest problems being turnovers and defensive rebounding. That's two things I've kind of written about a lot in the early part of the season. Maybe not as much recently on the defensive boards for Indiana, but the turnovers have been a problem. What just from watching Michigan, what are maybe the issues there in terms of why they're turning it over so much in the defensive glass as well?
So offensively, sorry, my dog is losing her mind a little bit. Offensively, I think you can really say that Michigan has committed any sort of turnover that you can commit. A lot of people want to harp on the fact that they are playing two bigs together, or sorry, that they're playing really quick. Then they're playing too fast, and that's leading to a lot of turnovers. The turnovers are actually coming more in the half court. And I think the biggest factor with that is if you look up and down the roster, almost everyone at Michigan is playing a bigger playmaking role than they played in the past, right? So like Roddy Gale is taking on a bigger role. Trey Donaldson isn't just a platoon point guard. He's playing 33 minutes a game. Danny Wolf isn't just a big that can pass. He's playing out of ball screens and is a legitimate wing player for Michigan. So it's just this kind of overall shift in the roles. And Dusty May clearly wants a very, I guess you'd say, like egalitarian play. Like he wants everyone to be able to put the ball on the floor, get in the paint, make a pass. And he wants to play fast and he wants to play aggressive. And Michigan's creating great shots out of that. Like they're one of the best 2-point shooting teams in the country. But a lot of those assisted baskets come at the price of, well, I tried to make the pass that was there and I airmailed it out of bounds, or they read this play. So it's just been kind of processing, growing. And I think you would expect some improvement there, but like you have, like Michigan is what, 325th in turnover rate. That's not like bad. That's worst in the country among high major teams bad. So it has to get somewhat better, but I don't think you're going to turn around in March and say, wow, this looks like a John Beilein team that never turns the ball over either.
Yeah, that's interesting. But despite those those issues, Michigan's, as you mentioned, off to a really solid start. Be real interested to see how they play tonight against Oklahoma. Should be a really good game, really good early season. I guess not early season now anymore, but final non-conference test for both of these teams. But I want to dig into some of these other Big Ten teams, kind of looking back at where things were in the preseason. Purdue was the pick to win the Big Ten, and they're right now, obviously, off to a 1-1 start in Big Ten play. 21, it looks like, right now in Ken Palm. I think their defense is, to me, it stands out as having taken a huge step back. I think both of us have probably thought that was going to be the case a little bit in the preseason with, you lose Zach Edey and that presence in the paint, and you're playing, Kaufman ran a lot at the center position. The rim protection obviously has taken a step back, but Purdue right now, are you buying them kind of as a team that can still win the Big Ten, or are they maybe fallen a little bit from where they were in the preseason in your eyes?
Yeah, you look at the Zach Edey thing is obvious, but Daniel Jacobson suffering a season-ending injury in the first week of the year, I think was a real killer for them, because it seems like the plan really was to have Kaufman Wren play the 4 and play some of those 7-footers a lot of minutes at the 5. And I think you can see why, right? Trey Kaufman Wren has one block shot all year. Like he's not a rim protector as good as he has been. And that limits the upside of this team. At the same time, though, you look, Braden Smith is one of the best point guards in the entire country. The offense hasn't really missed a beat. They're going to be competitive in basically every game. I think they can still get to whatever it's going to be, with 13, 14 sort of wins in the Big Ten to be in the title race. So I wouldn't say right off Purdue, but at the same time, I don't think they have the upside defensively that maybe we would have thought if they had a 7-footer that they could play alongside Kaufman Wren in this paint.
Absolutely. There was a lot made in kind of the preseason about Braden Smith and whether he was worthy of the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year honor, but he's been really, really, really solid through the first month of the season. I think he continues to get better as the season rolls along. Maybe not as clear cut of a pick as what we've seen in previous years with the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year. We knew that it was going to be Edey, particularly last year, but I thought Smith was a worthy pick in the preseason. I think so far he's kind of lived up to the billing, although there's been a lot of other guys in the Big Ten who have stepped up. What stands out
Yeah,
to me right now, just go ahead.
People have narrowed the gap to Braden Smith from the preseason. I don't think Braden Smith has faltered at all, right? Like Braden Smith is exactly who we thought he could be. And he's doing most of that. Like everyone, there was the whole idea that he was going to struggle without, like Braden Smith's been awesome. The other players in the Big Ten, especially young players in the Big Ten, have just been terrific. And that has been what has made it a more interesting race, I would say, as far as who is the best player in the league.
Yeah, the two West Coast teams, UCLA and Oregon, have really caught my eye early in the season. I had a chance to watch some of that game at Oregon when UCLA went up there and won with that buzzer beater. Was a really impressive win. UCLA was a team, I think they were in kind of in a similar boat, like record wise, and where they finished last season to Indiana, and they're now, from a Ken Palm perspective, the best team in the Big Ten. They're 14th. They're 10-1 overall, 2-0 in the Big Ten. Obviously, it's not a sexy style of play to watch, the way they play, and their ceiling may not be as high as some of these other teams, but their floor is pretty high because we know they're going to defend. We know they've got talented pieces across the roster, a lot of guards that can do multiple things, and they've had some front court players step up early in the season. And Oregon, kind of the same thing with, it's been big for them to get Nate Biddle back and healthy. Last year he was hurt, and that really, they obviously had another front court player who
Dante last year.
Yeah, he was great in the front court, but getting Biddle back and healthy has been just a huge thing for Dana Altman. To me, kind of looking at Oregon and UCLA, they're just as good as any Big Ten team right now. Would you agree with that? And what has been impressed you about both of those teams so far?
Yeah, I picked UCLA to win the league in the preseason, and I was a little nervous about that the first week when they went and lost to New Mexico, but I think their defense is as solid as any in the league. They turn teams over better than just about, I think they're number one in the country in turnover rate. You could ask, is that going to work in the Big Ten where a lot of programs just don't turn it over, right? You're not going to turn Wisconsin over 30 times or whatever. But at the same time, I think there's some real, like UCLA has the step, they have this defense, but there are stretches where it just looks like they're never going to score a basket again. And the offense
like the Arizona game.
Yeah, there was some brutal stretches in there, and the offense has almost no floor. And the guy who has been really key for them on both ends of the court has been Eric Daly, who starts at the 4 spot and is kind of like a 6'8" swingman. He was a former McDonald's All-American, transferred from Oklahoma State. And when he's on the court, I think they're very, very solid. But he had foul trouble in that Arizona game, and when he was off the floor, they kind of completely lost their way. So that's something to look at. They're extremely deep. They have a bunch of guards, and I don't think there's maybe a guard that you would say, wow, I need that guy running my team. But there's guys that you can put in the game if someone else struggles, right? If Dylan Andrews is having a bad day, maybe Sky Clark has a good one. You have Trent Perry, McDonald's All-American, off the bench. So they have guys. Sebastian Mack has upside. And again, you can just kind of shelve him if he's not feeling it, right? So it's an interesting roster. I have a hard time gauging maybe the upside in the Big Ten. They've played a really weak non-conference schedule for the most part. They're turning over Cal State Fullerton or Southern Utah. They beat Washington. They have that good Oregon win, but what's it going to look like when you get to the Big Ten, when you start traveling to the East Coast every other week or whatever it ends up being? And then the thing with, I guess, both West Coast schools is they both have double plays against Washington and USC, and those are pretty close to 4 wins in the bag. So that's something to keep an eye on too. When it comes to the title race, that's probably going to have 4 or 5 teams separated by a game or two in the standings.
Yeah, UCLA's got a pretty big game coming up this weekend. Well, probably a bigger game more so for North Carolina, because North Carolina's non-conference resume right now is pretty bare. So it's a chance for them to get a win against a pretty solid NCAA tournament team in UCLA. But that would be another solid win, I think, long-term for UCLA if they could get it. Any thoughts on Oregon, Dylan, before we kind of move on to some of the more traditional Big Ten programs? I know Oregon was another team that you liked a lot in the preseason. We were both high on Shellstead. They're they're what the banked in 3-pointer from Dylan Andrews away from being 11-0. So they've been
Yeah.
as good as you can be so far, basically.
Yeah, they had a really, really good week in Las Vegas at the players there, right? They beat Texas A&M, they beat Alabama, and those are wins that are gonna age. You look at their profile, and they're kind of just down the line, competent offense, defense. They don't really have any major outliers statistically. They have talented players like TJ Bamba's been a great pickup for them, but even he's a little inconsistent. Shellstad hasn't quite been the sort of all everything guy that I think we had him in the top 5 in our list. He's been up and down a bit, has had some good games, some quiet games. They've
Yep.
been good. I don't know what to make of them, and I think they're a team that you're going to want to watch really closely the first week of Big Ten play when they host Illinois and Maryland. Those are two really, really good teams, and those are games they could lose, but they're also games that you probably need to win at home if you're going to be a Big Ten contender. But yeah,
Yeah.
they're very good. I think they're clearly like an NCAA tournament team. I don't know. It's a lot easier to find teams that are good than to say like this team can't contend, right? Like you can make a case for so many teams in the league. Like if a couple things go right, maybe they do contend in this conference. And it's hard to write teams off other than a couple select few.
So the teams, kind of digging into that real quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on these teams, but the teams that I think we can write off. Well, I don't want to say write off completely, but there's anything can happen. We've seen that, and I think a couple of these teams will probably have some nights at home where they knock somebody off. We've seen that
Mm-hmm.
a lot in the Big Ten over the years. There's no easy game on the road in the Big Ten in many cases, but USC, Washington, and Minnesota to me are the clear teams that are fighting to avoid missing the Big Ten tournament. Any disagreement there?
No, I Minnesota seems a long way off from being even able to knock teams off at home. They kind of have been this scrappy worst team in the league recently, and now they just seem like an outright worst team in the league. Washington is harder for me to sort out because it's a first year head coach. Like I feel like there's going to be consistent improvement there just because I think Danny Sprinkle is a good coach and they're going to keep chipping away. But they also lost by 24 points at home to USC. So there's going to be a lot of chipping that has to happen there. So that's how I would break those down. But I do think it's a weird subplot where you're going across the country to play USC in what will often be a back-to-back road game for almost every team in this league. And I don't know, like that's going to lead to some surprising results. I think with it's a risky thing to have your worst team in the league be on the other side of the country, I would say. And to have 2 of those games, it could be a trap spot for a lot of teams, right? Because everyone's going to play at least one of those teams on a road trip. So that's a tough spot, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to UCLA and then you got to couple that, you got to follow that with USC. I mean, you could be up for UCLA and suffer a close loss, and then all of a sudden, how do you bounce back when you have to go to USC 2 or 3 days later? Same thing, kind of with the Oregon and Washington situation.
Yep.
It's just kind of a weird setup in terms of having to play what could be a contender and then a bottom feeder, and I think that's where those teams could be dangerous, particularly if if a team really needs a win against an Oregon or UCLA and they fall a little short. How do they respond? Can they get up for a game or vice versa? I mean, what if a team's going out to play UCLA? They got to play USC first. Are they looking ahead to UCLA? Have they looked at USC's schedule and said, well, they've lost 2 or 3 in a row. This is going to be an easy game. How do you adjust to the travel? Is another key aspect of it. So that to me, when we get into the meat of the Big Ten schedule, I think it's going to be pretty fascinating just to watch how some of these teams adapt to the travel. Michigan goes out west. Was it in January? Is that right?
Yeah, so they resume Big Ten play at USC and UCLA, so right after New Year's, which is probably a decent time to go out there, right? It's kind of like it's a clean slate. I think they play a bye game on the 29th. Then you get some time to go out and acclimate, still over Christmas break and whatnot, you would think.
Right. So kind of moving back to more of the traditional Big Ten footprint. We've talked about Michigan. Obviously, they're 2-0. The other team that started off 2-0 in conference play is Michigan State, which they went to Minnesota and won, which I mean, you would think if if you're going to be an NCAA tournament team, you need to go to Minnesota and win. Then they absolutely destroyed Nebraska by 37 at home. They've not really beaten a great team. I mean, they do have the win over North Carolina, which, as I mentioned with North Carolina a little bit earlier, they don't right now really have much on their non-conference resume. They did beat Colorado on a neutral floor out in Maui. That was also where they beat North Carolina. Have the loss to Memphis. Have the loss to Kansas. No real bad loss, but I think the jury's a little bit still out with Michigan State, but you never count out a team that's coached obviously by Tom Izzo, and I do think they've done some nice things early in the season. Is Michigan State in your mind a team to be watching for in terms of contending for the Big Ten, or are you not ready to go there yet?
I think Michigan State is overwhelmingly competent. They've executed basically in every game. They haven't let anything get away from them. They have a lot of depth, right? They're playing just about everyone. At the same time, I'm not really sure what makes this team super dangerous as you move into Big Ten play. I'm not sure what is going to make them great. And so I think they're a team that can hang around in the conference race, especially early. Their schedule is pretty backloaded. So they're a team that should rack up wins in January and should be in the mix at the top of the standings. I still need to see a little bit more of the upside. Like, I don't have a clear vision of what makes Michigan State elevate from a 11 or 12 win team in the Big Ten to a 14 or 15 team win in the Big Ten, and whether they can do that consistently. Because right now it seems like they're almost still trying to figure out who's in their rotation, what's the rotation that matters. And look, there's ways they could get there, right? Chase Richardson has been this awesome freshman. Like, maybe he just completely elevates his game over the next 6 to 8 weeks and all of a sudden is looking like a lottery pick, playing like producing like a lottery pick, and turns everything around late in the year. Like, that's very possible. So they're good. Again, it's very hard to rule teams out, and there's no real reason to rule Michigan State out right now. They've really been good around the basket, good on the glass. And if you can win the 2-point shooting battle and win the rebounding battle every game, you're never going to be out of a game. The problem is they just don't shoot threes and they don't make threes. They're shooting 28% from three and they only shoot 34% of their shots from three. And Indiana fans probably don't need me to explain what that means for your long-term upside offensively. And then you look at the Big Ten, they had played the second easiest schedule in the Big Ten in those first two games. The only team to play a weaker schedule in those first two games was Indiana.
Yeah, I just noticed that too on the strength of schedule. That's obviously that there's a lot to sort out with that as the season moves along. It's extremely early. They've only played 2 games, but I did notice that as well. A team that I was pretty high on in the preseason, and a team that they have taken 3 losses, but I like their upside as much as any team long term in the Big Ten. They've been really really good defensively. I think outside of Maryland and UCLA, they're the best defensive team in the Big Ten thus far. Illinois, I've just been impressed with. They basically turned this whole roster over outside of maybe a couple of pieces, and they've come out and played really well. I mean, they had a chance to beat Tennessee late in their most recent game, lost by 2. Obviously, they take an overtime loss at Northwestern in Big Ten play. I think a lot of teams are going to probably have a struggle going to win at Northwestern. Lost to Alabama down in Birmingham, which not really a true road game, but obviously it's a atmosphere where there's going to be more Alabama fans. But they do have obviously the wins over Arkansas, Wisconsin. I've just been impressed with Brad Underwood just in terms of being able to this quickly bring all of these new faces together and put them in position to be successful. And they've got obviously 2 really good freshmen, and Yakachonis and Will Riley, who are both playing extremely well. And they've got, I think, all the ingredients of a Big Ten contender. They defend the ball, or they defend well. They do take a ton of threes. They haven't shot particularly well from 3 yet, 32.4% right now, but they're taking a ton of threes. And so if they start making perimeter shots more consistently, I think they become even more dangerous with how well they're defending.
Yeah, it's funny. right now they're 31st on offense and 13th on defense. I personally am higher on their offense than their defense. I wouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
surprised if those numbers flip over the course of the season, and I wouldn't be surprised if the best case for Illinois fans is probably the offense improves because again, they like you said, they take a ton of threes, they haven't made them, and the defense stays that good. But I think that the defense, there's a lot of teams out there right now that have great adjusted defensive numbers because they hold kind of the 200 and worst ranked teams to like 25 points in a game.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
to me, Illinois has done a lot of that to the point where I think it's juicing up some of the defensive stats. I think there are some concerns they have individually, defensively, when you get into Big Ten play, just with Kasparis' ability to guard the perimeter, Hummerkau's ability to guard the perimeter. I think there's some areas that Big Ten teams will target a little bit. And if you look at their numbers, like they've played some very, very good teams that have scored on them, but the good teams have scored on them. At the same time, I have all the confidence in this offense just because I think Kasparis is that good offensively and his playmaking, the shooting around him. There's so much there. Like Kylan Boswell hasn't even shot well yet, and the offense I think still has a ton of room to grow. So I get there's like Boswell's a good defender, Trey White's a good defender, but I think there's some individual issues of guys that are non-negotiable. Like they have to be on the floor for this team to succeed, like Kasparis, that are going to get picked on defensively a bit. So I'm curious if that flips, and if it doesn't, then Illinois, the ceiling is there's no ceiling, I would say, because they're going to make threes eventually. So that's where I'm at with Illinois. I really like the roster. I think I want to see a little more of it in Big Ten play, right? They got the win over Wisconsin. They beat Arkansas. Like they have some good wins, and can they create some consistency in the league with such a young roster? I think is still something to keep an eye on.
Another team that's been really impressive early in the season, Maryland. The Terps 9-2 overall. They lost a close game at Purdue by 5. Their second game in Big Ten play. They had Ohio State down by 40 at one point at the Xfinity Center back on December 4th. They did lose at home early on to Marquette, which Marquette's a top 10 team right now in Ken Pom. Have a neutral court win against Villanova. But after the miserable experience of last season that was watching Maryland basketball, I've actually tuned into a couple Maryland games this season, and I've been impressed with just how they've retooled this roster. Jacoby Gillespie's been really good, shooting almost 43% on threes, distributing the ball pretty well. Derek Queen, right up there right now in terms of the race for Big Ten Freshman of the Year, among the better players so far overall in the Big Ten, just with how he's come out and got to the free throw line, rebounded the ball, scored the ball. I mean, efficiently. He's shooting almost 69% on twos. And some of the other you guys that they brought in, I mean, Rodney Rice and Selton Miguel, both shooting it well from the perimeter. So Maryland, quite a turnaround from last season, and it feels, obviously we'll see when they get into Big Ten play, and they have played some just. We talked about this, I think, a little bit in the preseason, Dylan, privately when we were kind of going through some of these non-conference schedules. They've played a disgraceful non-conference schedule.
Second worst schedule in the country.
Yeah, they've played Manhattan, Mount St. Mary's, Florida A&M, Bucknell, Alcorn State, St. Francis. None of those teams are better than 260 in Ken Pom. So they basically have 6 wins that they completely bought. But I do think this team's a lot better than it was last year, and I do feel like if they continue to defend, I mean the defense was good last year. The offense was really what was the problem, but I do think they've addressed some of those issues with Queen, and I'm curious to see how it continues to work with him and Julian Reese. But I like Gillespie and what Rice and Miguel have brought to them in the backcourt. They're not obviously relying nearly as much as they were on Deshaun Harris-Smith, which they had to last year. So it just feels like overall they've gotten much better, more experience in the backcourt. They've added a piece in Derek Queen, who's one of the better front court players so far in the Big Ten. And I'm not a huge Kevin Willard fan, but credit to him for how he's kind of flipped this roster and made Maryland basketball at least watchable this year so far.
Yeah, the best endorsement of Rodney Rice and Selton Miguel is that they have played Deshaun Harris-Smith out of the rotation, which is needed to happen. But last year, like you say, they were stuck playing him 30 minutes a game because there was no one else to play on the wing. Rice and Miguel have both been great pickups. Gillespie, I loved in the portal, and he's been awesome. And the two big things mostly working because Derek Queen is just an awesome player. I think he's there's a ton of great freshmen in the league, and he's every bit one of them. And we haven't really said that about the Big Ten in a long time, right? It's been a while since there were 4 or 5 kind of legit star freshmen who were not just viewed as prospects by the NBA, but were producing like some of the best players in the league. And I don't know if it's kind of the tail end of the COVID year thing or what, but it just seems like there's been more star impact freshmen in the league than we've seen for a while. And I think that's exciting as a fan of the league, even if a lot of these guys are going to be probably one and done when all is said and done. But Queen's been awesome. It's a classic Kevin Willard schedule where they just don't play anyone. And I feel like if they go and lose a couple games in the Big Ten, I won't necessarily be surprised just because of that. But that Ohio State win shows what they're capable of at their best, right? Like they just blew that team out of the water. And then they turned around and they were at least competitive at Mackey in a game that they hung around in for most of the night, right? So I think Maryland is the real deal in the sense that this is an NCAA tournament team. I do think they're one of these other teams where if you look down their KenPom page, every stat looks incredible because they've won a bunch of games by 40 points against teams they have no business playing. So I'm curious how it works out in the Big Ten, but right now they look legit, and I think probably a lock to finish better. I don't think they were picked better than like 8th or 9th, 10th in the league this year, probably, right? And they're clearly better than that, and they look like they should be in that kind of top 6, 7 all year, I would say.
No, I think it's a good sign that they played Marquette as well as they did at home. You never want to say like it's a good thing you lose a game.
It's a home
obviously
loss.
much better if they win, but it's still they didn't get run off the court, which I feel like would have happened last year against a top 10 team for Maryland. That to me is a little bit of progress, and being competitive at Purdue, I think that's a tough place to play. I mean, among the toughest in the Big Ten, they didn't win the game, but we'll see. I agree with you. I think I don't think they're a contender necessarily to win the league, but I do think they're probably a solid NCAA tournament team, assuming they continue to mostly take care of business at home and win some road games. But I do want to give Kevin Willard obviously some credit for being able to make this work so far, and it's been one of the better early season coaching jobs in the league. We'll see how it continues. Another team that's really kind of overperformed, I guess, maybe relative to expectations early on, has been Penn State, who, again, you kind of look at the resume and who they've played. Not a lot of meat on the bone, but they do have the home win over Purdue. They have a neutral court loss to Clemson, and that road loss to Rutgers, which I don't know how that's going to age over the course of the season. But Penn State, the biggest compliment you can give them is they're going to come after you for a full 40 minutes every game. You know how they're going to show up. They're going to play hard. I think Ace Baldwin is one of the better point guards just overall, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. A true two-way guy who distributes the ball, can harass the other team defensively. And, I don't know that Penn State's a team that ultimately makes the NCAA tournament, but from where they were picked in the preseason, they've been, to me, one of the more bigger surprises thus far in the Big Ten and the Big Ten so far.
Yeah, so here's the problem with Penn State. Ace Baldwin has been legitimately awesome, but they did kind of what Minnesota did recently, where I almost feel like they scheduled themselves out of the NCAA tournament by playing such a weak non-conference slate where there's no margin for error in the Big Ten. Like they have to probably get above 500, right? Their best non-conference win is over Fordham, Virginia Tech. Those teams aren't good. I've seen Virginia Tech in person. They were terrible. That's not going to be a great win that's going to help you get in the tournament. And yes, you get a bunch of chances in the Big Ten, but you're not going to be able to limp in a way that you would if you had stolen a game or two, right? That Purdue win at home is not going to be enough to just get you in to the NCAA tournament, as much as the vibes might feel like it when you rush the court and beat them at home and it feels like everything is great. So they schedule in this way that creates momentum and whatnot, but they're still not, like, they have a lot of work to do to actually get the wins to play their way into the NCAA tournament. Like, even a team like Indiana,
their double plays aren't great either for that, because they play Indiana twice, they play Rutgers twice, and they play Minnesota twice. Those are three teams, like, right now, if the tournament were to start today, they're not tournament teams.
Yeah, that's fair. But I just think, like, look at Indiana, like a win over Providence, South Carolina. Those are way better, but just even like subtle building blocks to have as far as building on the tournament resume. And I just don't think Penn State has that. It'll be interesting. I think they're good. I think they're going to be a bear to play against on the road. Like Indiana has to play them
Palestra.
in at the Palestra. I was at the Palestra last year for one of those games, and it was a madhouse. So that's going to be a really tough one. But they're tough, and I think we need to just stop betting against second-year up transfer point guards, because it seems like without fail, these guys take a big leap almost every year, and Ace Baldwin has been no exception to that. Like, this team, it's fun to watch. They're tough. I just think they're going to have to work so hard just to get to 500 in the Big Ten, and that is going to be really a long
And
selection Sunday, you would think.
500 might not even get them there, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there's no
exactly.
guarantee.
I think
It depends. It depends. I mean, two of those wins are likely going to be Minnesota, so those aren't going to really mean anything. So it's going to really come down to who else they beat and where they beat them.
it's going to, how many road games are they going to win in the Big Ten? And is that enough to push them over the hump? We'll see. It'll be interesting. Cause like, it's not like they're just going to be an automatic win at home in all these games either. Right. I think they're good,
No.
but they're not that good.
No, they don't have. I mean, obviously, Palestra will be a crazy atmosphere for the Indiana game, but there's going to be some games in the conference season at the Bryce Jordan Center where they, for whatever reason, it's snowing outside or terrible conditions. They don't get a big crowd, and some teams are going to go in there and have a chance to win. So it's not, they're hurt a little bit by the fact that their home court at the Bryce Jordan Center is not the greatest. It's not an easy place to play either sometimes, but um, it's just kind of underwhelming overall in terms of an atmosphere. I've been up there once and nothing really obviously to write home about. But the other team, another team that I kind of wanted to touch on was Ohio State, because I don't know what's going on with some of the stuff with obviously Aaron Bradshaw's out and now Michi Johnson's taking a leave of absence from the team. It's kind of been unspecified, but you look at some of their losses. I mean, that Pittsburgh loss at home, a bit of a backbreaker, losing how they did in overtime. But Texas A&M, they played on the road, lost by 14. Got crushed by Maryland on the road, and then there's no shame losing to Auburn, but the way they lost to Auburn by 38 points. They're another team that they have that early season win against Texas on a neutral court, and the Rutgers win at home, but kind of a bare, non-conference resume at this point. They do have an opportunity coming up this weekend against Kentucky on a neutral court, so that could be a chance for them to really get a win that matters. Hard to see them winning that game though, based on their personnel. And I don't. You look at their Ken Pom page, and there's a lot of things that don't look necessarily all that great in terms of they're fouling teams a lot, not offensive rebounding, not causing turnovers, poor free throw shooting team, and then now you start having guys out for various reasons, and you wonder if this is a team that ultimately is going to fail to meet the expectations maybe that were placed on them prior to the season.
Yeah, and they're still getting the Jake Diebler shot luck, right? Like, they're shooting 41% from three. Their opponents are shooting 28% from three, and they're 7-4. Like, that's terrifying. Like, you should be undefeated if you're out shooting teams by 12% from three every game. So that's the concern. If I don't really know what the latest is on the Aaron Bradshaw situation, but I believe he's back with the team. And I think that's, if he does end up returning to start playing, that's huge for them, just because, like, he's the only really big man they have, like true five they have. And I think that's been a big weakness over this most recent stretch. And you're not going to make it through the Big Ten without a center, right? Like, Sean Stewart is this athletic four-man, but he's not really a true center. And you're going to be playing Derek Queen and Julian Reese, Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden, like all of these big lineup combos. And I think they need some size in there. But at the same time, this Kentucky game is huge, because you fall to 7-5 and you have a long way to go uphill with whatever else. Like, it's hard to say because there's so much kind of unknown, right? Like, we don't know what's going on with Michi Johnson, Aaron Bradshaw. Those are huge pieces. Michi Johnson just hasn't been, I think, the guy they hoped he would be on the court when they picked him up from South Carolina, right? So it's a tough spot. and then you have a first time head coach, right? It's not where you want to be as a first year head coach, and you see it's the kind of schedule that makes you understand why some coaches schedule the 358th toughest schedule in the country, right? Like, give Ohio State credit, they went out and played people, they played away from home, they played on neutral sites, but it hasn't all worked out right now, and I'm not really sure where it goes. At the same time, I wouldn't want to be opening Big Ten play by going to Valley City Arena, right? Like, Michigan State is a team where everything seems to be working, but would anyone be shocked if they go into Columbus after New Year's and lose? Like, there's enough talent there that they can beat some people. So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But there's a lot of questions, and it seems like so much is working, right? Devin Royal's been great. John Mobley has been awesome and shooting the lights out from three. He's 54% from three on 56 attempts, right? So it's scary that all that is working and they're losing games, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. So there's several other Big Ten teams kind of that we've not touched on. I wanted to just get your thoughts quickly on a couple of these teams. Iowa, you saw them play Michigan at the Chrysler Center. They've been a solid team. They kind of fall in this category of team that right now I feel like is definitely going to be at least at the least on the bubble come Selection Sunday, but we'll see if they are able to win enough Big Ten games to make it a strong conversation for the tournament. Wisconsin's another team that Michigan played early in the Big Ten schedule and had a chance to go up there, and they won that game. That was a good win. Where are you at in terms of Iowa and Wisconsin right now? Wisconsin, I think, got as high as 11 in the AP poll after that really hot start, and they've obviously cooled off. Now they're 9-3, and they're one of three teams 0-2 in the Big Ten. But a lot of that has to do with who they've played in those first two games. But I'm just curious for quick thoughts on Iowa and Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's funny. You go and you like Arizona was probably top 10, top 15 in the preseason, right? Everyone decided they were a good team. So then Wisconsin beats them at home. It's this great early season win and they get ranked. But like KenPom for Wisconsin never cracked the top 25, despite the fact that their AP ranking did. I think both Wisconsin and Iowa, it's funny. Iowa is what you think, right? They're this great offense that can't really play a lot of defense. And Wisconsin, you have come to expect the opposite, but Wisconsin's kind of the same deal. They have this great offense, and their defense has shown some real issues. Both those teams are dangerous. I don't know which I would buy more stock in long term. I think there's something to the fact that Peyton Sandfort hasn't played great this year, and Iowa's kind of hanging in there. So if he can really get going, you could see Iowa winning a few games in a row. Both dangerous teams. Again, like there's no teams I'm eager to write off in this middle part of the league. All of these teams are going to be capable of winning most of their home games and stealing a game on the road, right? Like Iowa, for all their struggles, they were a missed 3-point shot away from beating Michigan at Chrysler, right? It's not like the separation is just so small. So that's kind of how I would phrase it. And I think that's kind of how this league is going to go. It's going to be just a brawl in the middle 10 teams in the league of just who can grind their way to enough wins to get where they want to be.
Yeah, we had, as you were talking there, Dylan, I got an email. This is the Indiana injury update that I wanted to briefly just talk about here on the podcast. But Ja'Kai Newton,
breaking news.
We got an email that Ja'Kai Newton, who as Indiana fans know, has really had a tough go of it with injuries early on in his career. From Indiana, I'll just read the quick release and then we can kind of continue on. Ja'Kai Newton underwent successful surgery to treat an injury to his lower body. He'll be out indefinitely, but is expected to return this season. The injury is not related to the one he had prior to the start of the 2023-24 season. So Ja'Kai Newton joins Gabe Cupps as two long-term injury guys at this point for Indiana. So not that either one I don't think was going to play a huge role with this Indiana guard rotation, but it does take a little bit of the depth away. Wanted to Dylan to ask you, last team I really wanted to touch on. Not going to get to Nebraska and Northwestern, so sorry if you're a fan of either one of those teams and you're waiting patiently for Dylan's thoughts. But I do want to ask you about Rutgers because they've been a team that I've watched a lot because obviously it's fun to watch Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. But you look at the Ken Palm number; they're 77. They're 7-4, 1-1 in Big Ten. The defense is just a shell of what it was last season. We expected some of that with having these two freshmen kind of playing so prominently and losing Cliff Amore. But Rutgers to me is a lot of fun to watch, but to me they feel pretty far away from having a legitimate chance to make the NCAA tournament this season based on what I've seen so far. Do you agree with that? And what have been kind of your thoughts thus far on the Scarlet Knights?
Yeah, so you look at their KenPom page and they're underdogs in their first 14 Big Ten games once the season starts up again, which says kind of how tough this league is. I think this month for Rutgers is all about survival. They had to win the Penn State game. They did, barely. They had to win the Seton Hall game. They did, barely. And they have to beat Princeton on a neutral, which is a tough game, right? I think they lost to them in the season opener last year. So they have to get these games. They have played a tough schedule. I think you can't bet against the talent, but I don't really know what a Rutgers team is that can't play defense, and that's going to be the concern. But like Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey both probably will win you 3 Big Ten games by themselves with some sort of Superman effort. The question is just, can you get those other 4 games to get to 500 in the league and then see what happens? It's inconsistent, but everyone knows how tough it is to play at the rack. They haven't lost at the rack. Jersey Mike's Arena. But I think that alone gives
long live the rack.
Long live the rack. That gives them a chance, and you don't want to have to go there, right? And these guys are super talented. Like Dylan Harper could just drop 40 in a Big Ten road game and beat basically, like, I don't think there's a team that's immune from losing to that sort of performance, right?
Yeah, but
He has
are they gonna
7 Ken Palm MVPs already this year?
But playing defense the way they are, I mean, how realistic is it that they even get to 500 in the Big Ten?
I don't think I bet on it, but I think it's possible. And again, like, it's not like they're losing to
I'm not saying
teams.
It's impossible. No, they're not losing to awful teams, but they haven't really. I mean, they beat Penn State at home. That's a game you should win. They needed overtime to beat Notre Dame on a neutral court. Other than that, they've really done nothing. I mean, they can't afford to lose this Princeton game or the Columbia game. I'll say that.
Yep. So and it's a chance. I don't think they're going to be more than 2 possessions better than like any game this year. So every game is going to kind of be like that. Maybe 1 or 2 slips away from you, but I don't see teams that have the talent to just say we're going to blow them out necessarily every night either. So that's the question for me: is can they hang in there? Can they win these next 2? Then can they go steal a win at Assembly Hall? Like, I'm not going to rule that out, right? I mean,
No,
that's kind of how it's going to go. And this league is going to come down to who can get the wins in the right places that sort of change their season outlook. And that's what I think they're going to need to do, right? Like they have work to do, but at the same time, that combo is just too talented to completely sell off, I would say, before Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, I think my thinking on them is a little bit maybe skewed by when I had Brian Fonseca on the pod over the summer. We talked about Rutgers, and I just kind of asked him like for the feeling within the fan base and like what the expectations were, and it was like he was talking about like going to the Sweet 16 or a Final Four run, and I'm thinking if that's what Rutgers fans were expecting, then this right now what they're seeing so far is far off from it. Not saying that it couldn't happen, but I think the fact that they got these 2 5-star kids, the expectations were ratcheted up quite a bit. And I think this team looks probably completely different if they have Amore in the front court helping with the post defense. I mean, I'm not saying he solves all the issues that they have, but I think they look much different with like an adult, competent front court player who can hold down the post, because I think it takes a lot of pressure off the guys on the perimeter trying to stop dribble penetration. I mean, right now there's really not a they just don't have it in the post, and I think that really hurts them.
Yeah, they can't play defense. And I think it was impossible for this Rutgers season to ever live up to expectations from what people expected. I think those expectations have probably been readjusted by now to the point where if they can put it together a little run, it could still be a pretty exciting year, right? So I think you have to adjust the expectations. But again, like, I do think the defense is a huge issue, and there's no free squares in the Big Ten, right? Like, you're going to have to play a great game to beat just about any team in this league. And every team in this league is going to be desperate for a win when they play you, right? no one's going to like overlook Rutgers when they're coming into their building. They're going to be like, wow, we need double-digit Big Ten wins. We better win this one. So it's tough.
For sure. Well, Dylan, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and give us your thoughts on some of these Big Ten teams as we get ready here in about a little over 2 weeks from now. We'll get into the meat of the Big Ten schedule. Obviously, didn't talk Indiana today because we talk Indiana every week, and I think the fan base right now is kind of I don't want to come on here and talk too much about how this team's played so far. People are disappointed and rightfully so, but Indiana has a chance to have a little bit of a reset here as the end of the non-conference schedule plays out. Get a chance to, I think, host Rutgers, as you mentioned, to resume Big Ten play, and then they go to the Palestra. We'll learn a lot that schedule for Indiana. You mentioned Rutgers being Ken Palm underdogs for a long stretch. There's a long stretch there for the Hoosiers, I think, where it's 10 or 11 games in a row where they're projected to lose on Ken Palm. So that to me is going to be season-defining stretch for Indiana. So
the good news, quality win opportunities. If you're an underdog, it means you got a Q1 game there. That's what you need to get like a couple of those wins. That turns everything around. So that's
I was
that's a
looking
gift
today,
and a curse.
They have 13 projected quad 1 games still on the schedule. So there's plenty of opportunities there. Whether they take advantage is a completely different story. But Dylan,
and that's
again, thanks
very
for coming
different. On. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's very different than like North Carolina, who's going to play maybe 5 more Q1 games this year, right? The ACC is in big trouble there. So there's a lot of opportunity to change the vibes for Indiana or any team in this conference. But it's always fun to come on the pod. I was excited to talk some hoops. This is one of I feel like the worst times as a true college basketball fan during finals weeks and the games slow down and you get that taste of Big Ten play. But we're a couple weeks away from the real thing. It's going to be great, and always great to be on here.
Yeah, of course, and of course, right now in Bloomington, all eyes on the college football playoff. So we'll see how that all shakes out this weekend, and whether Indiana can beat Notre Dame and get a chance to play Georgia down, I believe, in New Orleans if they're able to win. So that'll be a fun game to watch on Friday night in primetime, ESPN, ABC. If you enjoy podcasts on the Brink, please leave us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating over on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.